Although humans are scarier than Aragami, if you ask me.
And here we are. God Eater 3, the most recent entry into the series. The game was announced for PS4 and PC in early 2018, and it released in December of that same year for Japan. It was localized for the West in February of 2019, and in April of that same year, a Switch version was announced and made available for purchase in mid-July. Now, there is one thing that's probably starting to dawn on you right around now. Unlike its two older siblings, this game doesn't have a burst version. 1 and 2 got re-releases with an entire game's worth of content added in, but God Eater 3 has no such thing. In fact, during an interview taking place shortly after the game's Japanese release, general producer Yusuke Tomizawa took note of the fact that the expectation of the game getting a definitive edition actually deterred people from buying the vanilla versions of the older games when they came out. Series director Hiroshi Yoshimura later revealed that there were no plans to give the game a fully fledged burst expansion, instead opting for numerous free patches that added extra missions, character episodes, and outfits. So as of this video, taking the burst content into consideration, God Eater 3 does have the shortest main story. 1 and 2 took me between 70-80 hours apiece. This one only took like 25. However, I would definitely say that it has the longest post-game, so don't fret. There's still going to be plenty for you to do after those credits roll. And honestly, they're saying that they have no plans to give the game the burst treatment, but I'll take that with a grain of salt. The first game got 2 expansions. Burst was an expansion to Vanilla God Eater 1, and Resurrection was an expansion to Burst. Vanilla God Eater 2 still got DLC during the 2-year release gap between it and Rage Burst, so it's not like these games received no additional content whatsoever before their final expansions. I wouldn't be surprised if they went back on their word, maybe releasing a physical version of God Eater 3 Burst that contains the base game and the expansion for the people who haven't played the game at all, and then maybe a DLC for the people who already own a copy. That last part is just how I feel and the pattern I've noticed though. Like I said, as of now there are no plans for that. Anyway, I've gone on long enough about the game's launch. Let's talk about the setting. God Eater 3 takes place roughly 13 years after 2, so it's definitely been a while, and it is a bit disheartening to see that things have gotten much worse, especially after 2 Rage Burst ended on such a high note. Basically, a new threat called the Ashlands have emerged, and it's pretty dangerous. The game's database describes it as a collection of microscopic organisms that basically tear up any living thing it touches, human, God Eater, and Aragami alike. The Ashlands forced most of humanity underground, and as usual, humanity needed a way to reliably navigate the outside world, so they developed a new type of God Eater, the Adaptive God Eater, or AGE for short. They possess most of the abilities from previous generations, and most importantly, their bodies can withstand the ash much better than regular God Eaters. I guess they have a higher oracle to human cell ratio as well because they wear 2 armlets instead of 1, which also turn into a pair of handcuffs when they're indoors, and they're sometimes referred to as, and I quote, more Aragami than human. They're also treated like utter dog shit because of this. In the other 2 games, this wasn't the case. You were a soldier who was compensated well for your work. Feats that everyone deemed impossible became another Tuesday once your character strolled in. Don't even get me started on God Eater 2's protagonist. Joining a unit of elite God Eaters, having powers in your bloodstream, being able to turn Super Saiyan halfway through the game, and most everybody loved him, or her. But no, that ash resistance is just too much. We should totally make the Ages our slaves and treat them like animals. I guess Grem's disdain for the blood unit in God Eater 2 was just there to provide a taste of what was to come.
My apologies for those rude children. I am ashamed. They're really only good for fighting, you know.
And the fact that a lot of regular God Eaters engage in this prejudice as well makes the situation even sillier. Like, yeah, they've got 2 armlets and you have 1. Wow, they're so much more inhuman than you, am I right? Anyway, the game opens with a younger version of the protagonist and their friend Hugo being forced to take part in a compatibility test. In the other 2 games, you got a pat on the back when you passed your test, but in this game, they basically say congratulations, we own you now. And that pretty much sums up the setting.
So you survived. Grade A. Oh, I haven't seen your kind around here before. How does it feel to give up your humanity?
As I mentioned in first few hours, while the game at its core is still God Eater, there have been some significant changes, and instead of doing what I usually do where I strictly talk about the good and then the bad, I'll just mix them this time. I'll sort of highlight the differences, talk about how it was in the past, and then my overall opinion on the change and whether or not it affects the game for better or worse. But before I get into all that, because I know everyone's wondering about it, no, you don't need to play 1 or 2 to understand what's going on in 3. As a matter of fact, I'd say besides Besides the first game, 3 is the best entry point. It's noticeably easier than the other two. Like, it does become harder, especially after you beat the game and you start the extra missions, but generally speaking, it leaves way more room for error. Several features that took the form of items, skills, or abilities that needed to be equipped beforehand were just baked into the combat, and like I said, there's been a huge time skip between this game and God Eater 2. There's only one guy from the previous games who shows up, and he doesn't even really step to the forefront until the post-game, but I'll be getting into the story a little later. Just know that from both a story and gameplay perspective, God Eater 3 is the most far removed of the major titles. You already know it wouldn't be a God Eater review if I didn't start with the weapons, so let's get into it, one last time. Though it is worth noting, if you're coming from 1 and 2, all the weapons do feel faster in this game, so even the slow ones are only slow in relation to this game. Anyway, without further ado, short swords deal slashing and piercing damage. They're the second lightest weapon in the game, and they allow you to sidestep in midair. Its special move, the Rising Edge, has the player leap into the air with an upward swing that can be followed up with air combos. Long swords only deal slashing damage. They're heavier than the short sword, but not as heavy as some of the other weapons I'm about to mention. Its special move is the Zero Stance, which resets your combo and allows you to keep attacking indefinitely if circumstances allow. You can also follow up Zero Stance with Impulse Edge, a projectile that can be fired from the concealed gun portion of the blade. I feel like this move actually got buffed. There's this burst art called Purgatory Flame that strengthens Impulse Edge quite a bit, and after using it for several hours during post-game, I can confirm this thing punches through armor like the Kool-Aid Man. Buster Swords deal slashing and crushing damage. They're the heaviest weapon in the game, and they have 2 special moves: Parrying Upper, which allows you to block and counter, and Charge Crush, which I feel got nerfed a bit in this game. This thing used to do stupid amounts of damage in 1 and 2, but here I kind of felt like using my normal multi-hit combos were way more effective. It also has less range, since in the older games Charge Crush had an aura to extend its hitbox a little, so even if you weren't right up underneath the Aragami, you could still squeeze in a hit. But in this game, the aura is the same length as the blade, so if you're coming from 1 and 2, you'll probably miss with it a few times. I still used it as my main crushing weapon during the post-game though, just to change things up a bit. Hammers only deal crushing damage, and these were better in my opinion. Yes, after giving them the cold shoulder in 1 and 2, I finally warmed up to these things in 3. It's slow, but faster than the Buster, and because so many Aragami in this game seem to be weak to crush, you'll definitely find some use for this thing. Its special move is the Boost Ignition, which activates the thruster at the head. Pressing the light attack button causes the character to swing away at the target. Pressing heavy attack allows the character to dash around the room while swinging, and pressing light attack and the trigger once again allows the user to finish the combo with a downward slam. Like I said, I went with busters after I beat the game, but hammers were my go-to during the main story. Spears only deal piercing damage. If you're wondering which weapon I used the least, it was this one. I just didn't see the point. I used it quite a bit in 2 Rage Bursts, but in this game you've got 2 other piercing melee weapons you can use, so I ended up neglecting this one as a result. It has 2 special moves. The first allows you to hold down the attack button for a charged thrust. If you cancel this move prematurely, the head of the spear remains open and you can get in a few beefed up attacks. Its second special allows the player to backflip and evade attacks, and this can be followed up with aerial combos. Scythes only deal slashing damage. I didn't use these too often either, since there were so many other slashing alternatives, and I kinda got my fill with this weapon back in God Eater 2. Its special move allows you to extend the blade and sweep multiple enemies around you. You can also bring the blade down on an Aragami and reel it back in for extra damage. Now for the new weapons. The Biting Edge is the closest you'll ever get to dual wielding again after the drama that ensued in the first game. It splits your God Arc into a pair of knives that deal a mix of slashing and piercing damage. They've dethroned the short sword as the lightest weapon in the game, and I kinda held off on using this until after I finished the story because they just feel so broken. They don't do much damage, but I feel like their speed more than makes up for that, and it's really just a means to an end because its special ability allows the player to connect both blades end to end to form a glaive. The glaive form has a very spammable light attack that does quite a bit of damage, and if you keep attacking long enough, it'll enter a mowdown mode, which just extends the glaive to increase range and damage output. The only downside is when you're in glaive form, you can't devour, you'll do this weird diving attack instead, and your stamina doesn't regenerate, so it's something you will have to use wisely. Usually the pattern is to use the twin blades to stagger the Aragami, and then once it's down, pull out the glaive and go to town. This became the piercing weapon that I'd turned to when I got sick of the short blade though, and can you blame me? I mean, it's a bit awkward to use, but it sure is fun. The other new melee weapon they introduced is called the Heavy Moon. It's a giant chakram shuriken looking thing, and it does slashing and a little bit of crushing damage. It has 2 special moves. Holding down light attack allows the player to perform a move very similar to Buster Blade's Charge Crush. The Heavy Moon turns into a heavy chainsaw chainsaw axe that'll do continuous damage when it hits. Pressing light attack and the right trigger allows the player to use the axe for combos, and take note that the character can't move while the axe is out. This was my favorite weapon. It and the long blade were my main slashing weapons in this game, and it's kinda cool to see your character just jumping around and slicing Aragami with a giant disc. Let's be real here. Before I get into the guns, can we get a moment of silence for blast guns? These things had very expensive bullets, but they did stupid amounts of damage, and while they will be missed, it was a sacrifice that needed to be made. For I am proud to announce that the departure of blast guns also marks the end of friendly fire. It's okay, Mark. Cannon isn't in this game. She can't hurt you anymore. Alright, jokes aside, most guns deal either crushing, piercing, or a mix of both. Assault guns have cheap bullets and are meant to be fired rapidly. Its special ability allows the player to jump back. Sniper guns can be fired from far away, and its unique ability allows the player to generate a stealth field and move around without making noise and alerting Aragami. Shotguns are meant to be fired from point blank range, and its special ability propels the character forward, bringing you closer to the target. And lastly, we have the ray gun, the new gun that was introduced in this game. It fires a continuous laser at the enemy, and just like the blast guns from 1 and 2, it does have an oracle reserve that you can use to store ammunition. Frankly, this might be the real reason God Eater 3 has no friendly fire, because it's probably very hard to properly use this thing without getting caught up in the beam. Last up are the shields. Bucklers only absorb some of the damage from incoming attacks, but they deploy the fastest. Shields are slightly slower, but they absorb most of the damage from incoming attacks, and towers take the longest to deploy, but they absorb all damage from incoming attacks. Now there is a mechanic called just guarding, where you block right before an attack connects, and if you do it right, you'll negate all damage regardless of what shield you have, and any bonuses that you had equipped that rewards you for just guarding also take effect. Back in God Eater 2, I couldn't just guard if my life depended on it, quite literally, but I found it far easier to pull off in 3, so I actually felt comfortable running with bucklers for most of the game. I mentioned earlier how the weapons feel faster, but the same could be said about the gameplay in its entirety. The character moves faster, and they added a diving mechanic to make it easier to traverse the larger areas. Gone are the days of using all of your stamina to try and chase down a Vajra only for him to pounce to the other side of the map when you finally reach him. They didn't bring back the Predator styles from Resurrection, but they did give you the quick and air devours back, so you don't have to worry about comboing into devour like you did in God Eater 2. While Predator styles would have been nice to have in this game, I'm not that upset about them not returning. The thing that I liked most about them was the increased mobility they granted your stiff character in 1 and 2, but here they're buttery smooth in comparison, so I didn't miss them as much as I thought I would. I will say the biggest reason the game feels faster is simply because the Aragami have less HP. Like, way less. Aragami from the last game only have a fraction of the HP they had previously. Early missions are going to feel way too short at first, while endgame and postgame missions are going to feel, just right. The Aragami will usually die just when you're starting to get sick of it. Another thing worth mentioning are your teammates. In 1 and 2, they were little more than decoys used to clean up smaller enemies and distract larger ones. Here, I don't know what kind of vitamins these people have been taking, but they're strong as hell in this game. They're very much capable of taking out a medium-sized Aragami, and they'll put a noticeable dent in larger ones. Just like in the previous games, you can teach some skills, and this actually leads right into my next point. They nerfed the skills. Hard. The ones that activate at max level remain unchanged, but the buff skills, the ones that increased your melee attack power or gun damage or anything like that, most of them only do so by a little bit now. And when I say a little bit, I mean like maybe 2% per level on a good day. You're gonna look at that thing and be like, oh, forget it, what's the point? In 1 and 2, skills could go up to level 10, but now the buff skills on their own can only reach level 5. They can still stack up to 10, but you're gonna need 2 level 5 skills to get that effect, and like I said, it probably won't even be worth it since it only does so by a negligible amount. Picture this. Let's say you have an abandoned God Arc, which by the way are just the items that have the skills on them, so you install them onto your own equipment to get said skills. But let's say you have an abandoned God Arc and it has the Piercer skill and it's at level 5. Now Piercer increases your weapon's piercing damage by 0.5% per level. Yes, you heard me, 0.5%. At level 5, that means you can get 2.5% more piercing damage, and if you're lucky enough to find another level 5 piercing skill, you can install that into your equipment and they'll stack up to level 10. So congratulations, taking 2 high level skills and installing them in 2 different slots grants you a whopping 5% more piercing damage. Like, my god. Like, yeah, so OP, right? An extra 5%. The Aragami are going to be shaking in their boots when they hear that. And unfortunately, compound skills aren't available for your character anymore either. Back in the older games, these were considered to be singular skills that only took up one slot, but they'd have the effect of 2 or more weaker skills. I think a few are still available for the NPC characters, but none for you. I'd recommend investing in skills and burst plugins that prevent debuff, raise your max HP, OP, and stamina, and the cardiograph skill on either yourself or a few of your teammates so everyone can see the Aragami's HP. I'd also recommend maxing out heal for your teammates who can learn it. It's this game's version of Hate Up from 1 and 2, and it gives like a 50% increase, so the effect is potent enough for it to be noticeable. It'll keep Aragami more focused on your teammates instead of you. So yeah, half the skills in this game took a hard hit, but I don't think it really matters that much. Like I said, Aragami have way less HP, and your teammates are pretty beefy this time around, so they really aren't as crucial as they were in the older games, if I'm being honest. Next up are the burst arts. If you're familiar with God Eater 2, you're going to realize they're basically blood arts in all but name. They're special attacks that strengthen your light, heavy, step, aerial, or special attacks. As the name implies, you do need to be in burst mode before they take effect, but I feel like this was a change for the better. God Eater 2's awkward devouring mechanics coupled with the ability to use your blood art whenever you wanted would result in me just forgetting to maintain my burst mode more often than not. I feel like locking these moves behind burst mode really incentivizes the player to stay in it, which is something you should have made a habit out of to begin with since it already increases your movement speed and damage output. You can also have 3 of them now, and I can't stress enough how good this is. In God Eater 2 you could only have 1, and all this really did was encourage me to play around that specific blood art instead of doing my own thing and finishing the mission in the most efficient manner. Some blood arts, i.e. most of the aerial ones, were also very situational. They only worked on a handful of Aragami and were damn near useless outside of that. Being able to use 3 at a time just leaves way more breathing room and it makes your character a lot more well-rounded. You can also equip after effects to your burst arts, and most of these add extra auras or projectiles that'll make your attacks even more effective. You can even press menu or options or whatever the start button on your controller happens to be, and it'll take you to a training area where you can test out all your equipped moves. This is the main reason I wasn't too mad about the skills, because your character's moveset just has so much more versatility now that it'll be a bit overwhelming at first. Like I said though, the training area is one button away, so just head in there, experiment a little, and you'll be a master of the deity slaying ninja arts in no time. Another big change is the engage system. This is a new mechanic that's loosely based off of the link support from 2. The only difference is this time it's not a device that you have to equip beforehand. Instead, each person in your party has a meter, and it fills up as long as you stay close to them. Once it's full, you can activate it and 2 skills will take effect. One will be yours, the other will be your allies, but both of you will be benefiting from both skills. So for example, one of the engage skills that I used frequently throughout the main story was Ironclad Defense, because I wasn't out here trying to die or anything. If I triggered engage with say Feem, who has a skill called Healing Touch that enables HP regen, both of us would be affected by those 2 skills. We'd both get the increased defense and we'd both recover HP over time. And the same can be said about any other engage skills in the game. One more important thing, and I know I'm going on a bit of a tangent here, but it does tie back into engage. So going back to burst mode, it does have different levels, 3 of them to be exact, and the higher your burst level is, the more potent your attacks and burst plugins become. Now normally just eating the Aragami only sends you into burst level 1, and you usually can't get 2 or 3 on your own. Another character would have to fire a transfer shot to you to increase your burst level, and vice versa. If you wanted to increase a teammate's burst level, you'd have to fire a transfer shot at them. However, there is a loophole to this. If you fire a transfer shot at someone while you're linked up with them through engage, you'll both get the higher burst level. So bottom line, I'd say whenever you trigger engage, your priority should be switching to your gun and pumping your partner full of magical protein shots to get burst level 3 if you don't already have it. The last big change is the acceleration trigger, which is basically just a watered down version of Blood Rage from 2. Just like with engage, there are many different accel trigger skills that you can use throughout the game, and most of them, they increase stats like attack and defense, some increase movement speed, they heal you up, you get the idea. They essentially serve as little rewards for playing the game well. Each accel trigger has a condition that you have to fulfill to acquire the skill effect. So for example, one of the accel triggers I used often was HP Healer. It would give me regen for 15 seconds if I blocked a total of 70 damage. Another was called Guardian, which increases your defense if you block 2 attacks. There's another called Warrior, which increases your attack power if you land 3 combos. You get the idea. While it's definitely not as flashy and cool looking as Blood Rage, it can be triggered way more often, and most of the accel trigger skills are pretty damn good when used in conjunction with everything else the game gives you. Also, the accel trigger conditions do overlap, so going back to my example of the Guardian, which gives you a defense buff if you block 2 attacks. If you end up blocking 2 more attacks while the Excel trigger is still active, it'll reset the time limit and the new buff will replace the previous one. So depending on what you have, you could potentially keep your buff going indefinitely if circumstances allow. There's quite a few of them and they cater to a variety of playstyles. They don't all necessarily require you to be aggressive if that's not how you do things. Some of them reward you for not taking damage for a certain amount of time, others reward you for spending time in gun form, so whether you're the kind of person to be all up in the Aragami's phase or to take cover and let the laser gun do its work, there's probably an Excel trigger that you'll take a liking to. Going back to the topic of abandoned god arcs, I already said that these things have skills on them and installing them into your own god arc will grant you that skill. However, and this applies to all 3 games, some abandoned god arcs are special. They'd have a +1 in the title, and this basically just means that when you install it into your own god arc, not only would you get that skill, but it would increase the base stat of the god arc as well, whether that's attack damage for the melee weapon, defense for the shield, or the multiplier for the gun. Now back in 1 and 2, you'd only obtain the bonus if you installed the skill. Even if you just wanted the stat increase, you'd still have to take the entire thing as a package deal. But in this game, the +1 god arcs have an option called apply plus bonuses only. So if you already have the skills you want installed and you just want the stat increase, you can now choose to only apply the +1 bonus without having to worry about overwriting a skill that you already had. Oh, and by the way, +1 is just used to differentiate the normal abandoned god arcs from the special one. The actual stat increase is way more than 1 point. Another small but helpful change is the mission screen. Just like in the last 2, you take your missions over a counter and selecting them will provide you with a brief description of what's going on in the Aragami you'll be fighting. In this game, they're nice enough to also tell you the Aragami's elemental weakness right then and there, so now you don't have to walk over to a terminal and scroll through the database to find out. Now they still don't tell you what their body parts are weak to, so when it comes to slashing, crushing, or piercing, you're still going to have to experiment. But hey, at least now you won't accidentally walk into a fight with an ice type weapon only to find out that the new monster you're fighting also happens to be an ice type. If you played with elemental weapons in 1 or 2, you know this happened to you at least a few times. Then you had to quit the mission and come back with something else. The game does technically have fewer Aragami species, but this didn't bother me too much. And you might be wondering, well, why? Less species sounds like a bad thing. And you're right, normally it would be. But take note that a good half of the new Aragami introduced in the previous games were just recolors and reskins of already existing ones. Think about it. How many times has this series hyped up a new Aragami only for you to head out there and realize it's something you already fought but in a different flavor? People were also kind of upset about all the Scions except Marduk being absent in this game, and that I will give to them since most of the Scions were at least high quality reskins with powers that were unique enough to change how you approach them. I'm glad the Arc Aberrants are gone though. Good riddance, I don't miss them at all. Their little God Arc powers didn't make them harder, just more annoying. While I'm on the topic of Aragami though, this game just wouldn't be a proper God Eater title if it didn't bring its own souped up Aragami to the table now, would it? God Eater 1 had, well, just plain old Aragami since it was the first game. God Eater 2 had Scions during the first arc and Arc Aberrants during the second. And God Eater 3 has the Ashborne, large-sized Aragami that showed up around the same time as the Ashlands did. These are the big boys giving everyone a run for their money this time around, and for the most part they aren't too bad. They have the same amount of HP as any other large Aragami, and you'll get the hang of their moves once you fight each of them a few times. However, they do have one very nasty trick up their sleeve: Devour attacks. Yep, they can now eat you and enter their own version of burst mode. You spent all of 1 and 2 biting these things non-stop to make yourself stronger, and now they're tired of your shit. I've noticed that most of the time they perform the Devour attack after you make them mad and they activate, and the operator, Amy, will warn you when they're about to start their Devour attack. Listen to me, and listen to me good. Those Devour attacks are no joke. Not only does it strip the victim of their current burst status, which actually makes a lot of sense as they just got bitten, it also increases the Aragami's attack damage, gives them new moves, maybe a debuff or a larger hitbox on their base skills, and as an added kick in the balls, if you're the one who got bitten and you get KO'd while the Aragami is in burst, you'll automatically respawn with no link aid or anything like that. So basically you'll end up losing 3 times as much endurance than you would if it had just KO'd you normally. Look, you've seen the difference between your base character and your character in burst mode. Now imagine that happening to an Aragami. If you know you suck at just guarding, stay out of its way. There is no shame in running for the hills and waiting for it to calm down, because that's exactly what I did. At least initially. Like I said, after you fight them several times and you become more familiar with their attack patterns, it'll probably become easier to just guard and ruin their day, but until then, your priority should be living. Especially against this guy. And you might be thinking, weapons, why do you only bring up just guarding? I'll just do what I did in the older games, hold my shield in place and tank his hits. No, that ain't gonna work in this game. Just guarding is the only way you can stop a Devourer attack. That's why I said if you don't feel confident enough doing that, then just get the hell out of there, because if you try and block these things normally, they'll just punch right through your defense and you will get eaten. And you'll know too, because your character is going to fall over in slow motion and then lie there for like 5 years before finally getting up. Let's say you're having a bad day though, and none of what I just mentioned worked out for you. Maybe you tried to just guard and you were off by a nanosecond or two. Or maybe you did run away but the Ashborne ate one of your teammates instead. Now the thing is in burst mode and raring for a good fight. What will you do? Well, you have 3 options. 1, you can sit on the other end of the map and wait for it to finish. 2, you can suck it up, get in there, start swinging, and hope for the best, which actually isn't the worst plan in the world, since each of the Ashborne do have a core that can be targeted while they're in burst for a good amount of damage. I mean, and you could just shoot it too with your gun if you're feeling shy. Or 3, and this is what I did more often than not, eat it. No, I'm serious, spam Devour whenever you safely can. The Aragami burst mode lasts for a full minute, but devouring the Ashborne while it's in burst will make the time run out faster. At first I wasn't sure if this was true, so I went to test it because you'd think something that important would have been in the tutorial or at least in the game's database. To make a long story short, it is true. Apparently quick and aerial devours take off 3 seconds and a charged devour takes off 10. This is the method I'd recommend the most if you find yourself facing an Ashborne in burst mode. Take a page out of Nana's book. When you're sad, just eat an Odin sandwich. That'll make everything better. When I covered the other 2 games, I did complain quite a bit about the command system. I don't have anything new to say about it because they barely changed it. There will still be times where you'll tell your teammates to do something in the middle of a fight and they just don't do it. The only difference is now fights with 2 or more Aragami are less annoying because, like I said before, your teammates can actually hold their own this time. And lastly, the story. I'm about to discuss that in great detail in a few minutes, but I did want to give my general spoiler-free opinion on it. First of all, both of the story arcs in God Eater 2 had endings that would have made the Kingdom Hearts series blush. So when I started up God Eater 3, I was like, look, whatever happens, happens, because I'm ready for anything at this point. That being said, I did think it was pretty good. It doesn't top the first game's story, which has become my personal favorite, but it's definitely more down-to-earth than God Eater 2, although that's not really saying much. I will compliment it for its pacing though. The first 2 games felt like they moved too slow, and sometimes important story stuff wouldn't happen for like 3 missions. God Eater 3, in comparison, felt like it moved too fast. The story would progress after every mission at best and every other mission at worst, so as far as story goes, I'd rank God Eater Resurrection as first, followed by 3, and then 2 Rage Burst. I liked all of them, don't get me wrong, I just liked the first story the most and the second story the least. My only complaint about God Eater 3's story, without getting into spoilers, is that since it only spans 1 arc, I feel like some characters really got overlooked because there just wasn't enough time to flesh some of them out. And even some of the characters that initially had a strong start might have been left hanging partway through in favor of newer people introduced later on. I feel Vanilla 1 and 2 didn't really struggle with this. 1 gave everyone a purpose to be at the final boss. 2 even made sure that each character got their own little side story woven into the main plot when the main protagonist had to help everyone with their blood powers. The expansions only helped since you got to spend even more time with those characters, so it gets to the point where even though 2 Rage Bursts had the story that I liked the least, I still grew to love the cast due to all the time I ended up spending with them. Then again, if God Eater 3 ever does get a burst version, that issue could easily be rectified just like with the older games. And with that being said, I'm about to spoil the story, mostly for 3, but 1 and 2 might get spoiled a bit too when I talk about the post-game missions. Alright, if you're still here, I'm assuming you've either played the game already or you don't care, so let's get into it. First, we've got the cast. They're pretty enjoyable, but honestly, they're just as cookie cutter as the people from 1 and 2. You've got the silent protagonist who doesn't speak until the end of the game, the captain who will inevitably step down so you can become captain, the waifu, the other waifu, the goofball, the lone wolf, the engineer, the cinnamon roll who ends up saving the day, the operator, the commander, etc. You're gonna pick up on these immediately. I don't really have too much to say about the protagonist. Just like in the previous games, their compatibility test goes perfectly without a hitch. Grade A, cream of the crop, good at everything. They're the best god eater, yada yada. If you played the older games, you should know by now how quickly your character goes from virgin to Chad. Hilda's the boss. She runs the base and I don't know, I'm trying to think of anything else worth mentioning about her besides the obvious. Hugo's your childhood friend, and I'm really glad they didn't kill him off in this game. And you might be wondering why I would expect the writers to do that, so let me remind you of a couple things that transpired in the last 2 games. God Eater 1, Lindo, captain of the first unit, uses a long blade, really nice and kind to his teammates and puts an emphasis on getting along. What happened to him? He got an implied death scene during the first arc and the first unit barely managed to save him in the next. God Eater 2, Julius, captain of the blood unit, uses a long blade, also good-natured and urged the team to play nice. What happened to him? He contracted the Black Plague, mutated into the next singularity, and got trapped in the Spiral Tree. It took the blood unit an entire expansion to save him. God Eater 3, Hugo, leader of the Hounds, uses a long blade, keeps everyone straight. You see now why I wasn't looking too good for him? Every time this man went out to do something on his own, I started sweating. Claire kinda reminds me of Shield from the previous game, very straight-laced, kinda has tunnel vision when it comes to her assignments, like when an Ash Aragami raided their cargo and she tried to go in knowing she didn't stand a chance, but she does gradually sort of abandon that doormat type of personality. Honestly, I did find her to be pretty bland during the main story, but, you know, she did get fleshed out in traversing the past, although that was added after launch. Lulu is best girl. She was the type of character I was talking about earlier, the ones with really interesting backstories that either got cut short or wrapped up too quickly due to lack of time. I feel like they really could have expanded on her relationship with Port Baron, or really just Baron in general, since a lot of the things about them are told and not shown. Once again, traversing the past kind of fixes this, but it wasn't in the main story, and I feel like I have to keep pointing that out. Zeke is to God Eater 3 what Coda and Romeo were to 1 and 2. He does have his darker moments, but for the most part he's a pretty lighthearted, mischievous guy. Feem is Shio 2.0, only this time your character serves as a surrogate parent for the entire story. Ricardo exists. He's responsible for most of the chores like cooking and laundry, and I can't help but feel like he was more of an afterthought in the narrative. He's a god eater, you can take him out on missions, but he kinda just feels there a good chunk of the time. I feel like the writers kinda had to keep reminding themselves that he was part of the team, and once again traversing the past does flesh him out quite a bit, but again, it was added on to the game later. Keith is Zeke's brother, and he opts to stay at the base and work on the guard arcs and other devices that'll help you out as you progress through the game. While he is an age, he's not a very good fighter, canonically speaking, and that's why he prefers engineering over combat. If you do take him out on missions, you'll notice that a lot of his skills focus heavily on support instead of offense. Neil is Zeke's other brother, but unlike Keith, they were separated early on, so it's been a while since they've seen each other. He briefly shows up in the main story, but he doesn't join the team until you start the post-game missions. He is very distant at first, actually reminds me a lot of how Soma was back in God Eater 1, but he does kind of warm up to everyone soon enough. Amy is the operator. I don't really have that much else to say about her, and it really is one of the big reasons why I do miss the non-combatant characters having skills, because it really made them feel a bit more involved in what was going on. She's pretty cool as a person, and her character design's pretty good, but she doesn't really do much outside of operator stuff. Though I will say having her congratulate you at the end of almost every mission was a pretty nice touch, so I will give them that. There's also this guy named EIN. I feel like I've seen him somewhere before, but I can't quite put my finger on it. Anyway, those are your characters. As I said, unlike the previous game, it's pretty much all new people. There's only one returning character, and it's totally not EIN. As for the story itself, it's about as straightforward as the first game. You and your friends start from the bottom and you spend the entire campaign working your way up. And like I said before, the pacing is better. I said better though, not perfect. I did say that there are times where things happen too fast. Like anytime a character warns you about something, prepare to run into it after 2 missions tops. Man, I hope we get out of this prison soon.
What in... Huh?
I hope we don't run into any Ash Aragami. Nobody can beat an Ash Aragami. Whew, that was close. Hopefully we'll never have to fight one.
We have an emergency!
What is it?
Ash Ash Aragami approaching from outside visual range.
Anyway, after the compatibility test at the start of the game, there's a time skip and you and your friends are in prison. You guys belong to Port Pennywort, aka a bunch of bigwigs who treat their ages like shit. Whenever you go on missions for them, they're constantly reminding you of how little you matter and how much they wouldn't care if you became Aragami Chow. An age got eaten, they're disposable. Kid got sick, oh well, he better tough it out and stop crying. You spend pretty much all of your childhood there, doing missions for Pennywort and whatnot. Apparently you had a lot of friends there too, but by the time the tutorial starts, only you, Hugo, Zeke, Keith, and a handful of little kids are left. One day an ash storm comes along, and you remember what I said before, the ash tears up anything it touches. Ages can survive in the Ashlands better than regular people and standard god eaters, but even then they're not immune to it. It'll still wear down on their bodies over time. Now, ash storms are basically Ashlands on steroids. If you get caught up in one of these, you're screwed. It doesn't matter who or what you are. Anyway, an ash storm forms near your current mission area and conveniently swallows up Pennywort.
That's what they get for leaving kids to die.
However, it turns out that an ash crawler is nearby, and after you clear the area of Aragami, its commander, Hilda, offers you a ride. Don't worry, they save the children too. So now Hilda's in charge of you guys for the moment, and thankfully she's way nicer than the Pennywort pricks. Huh, that rolls off the tongue quite well. I'm gonna start calling him that now. Anyway, her port is called Chrysanthemum, and her ash crawler serves as your new command center.
Compared to ourselves, it's paradise.
The ash crawler was in the middle of a shipment to Gleipnir when the ash storm hit, and Gleipnir is basically just the organization that took over after Fenrir collapsed. Your group offers to help clear out any Aragami that might get in the way during the journey, and after a little negotiation they agree to split the reward between Hilda's crew and the Ages, and thus the Hounds were formed. Not long after that, Hugo and the Protagonist run into a girl named Claire who's guarding the cargo for the duration of the journey. The fact that Gleipnir planted a god eater on board to guard their own cargo should tell you that whatever's behind that door is very plot significant. And I guess I should clarify that Claire isn't an Age, she's just a regular god eater. She's got that one armlet privilege going on. Anyway, after completing a mission one day, your group comes across an Age, and Claire rushes in to help her, but it looks like she was perfectly fine because she springs into action and takes out Hugo and Zeke with minimal effort. Last I checked, this is a monster hunting game. It's not every day you see god eaters fighting each other, and I really have to hand it to them. Fight scenes of this series don't happen often, but when they do, they're a real treat to experience. Very well done. The girl has Zeke at, what would I call this? Knife point? Blade point? Biting edge point? Anyway, she demands that everyone else drop their god arcs, and they do so. The girl then asks to speak with the commander. Amy informs Hilda of the situation, and they learn that the girl is named Lulu, and she comes from Port Barren. Lulu says that she was left stranded outside after a mission and wants a ride back. However, when Amy goes to confirm this, she says there's no record of an Age named Lulu in their files. And since the ash density is pretty low, Hilda decides to go outside, yes, outside, and talk to Lulu directly. She explains that there's no Lulu anywhere in Barren's database, and now Lulu looks confused, but then after a couple seconds everyone puts 2 and 2 together and realizes what's going on. Port Barren sent her out on a mission and abandoned her. Then they deleted all the evidence to cover their tracks. The crew is trying to decide what to do with her, and Hilda recommends she join the team. Everyone agrees for their own reasons. Keith in particular wanted an opportunity to analyze the acceleration trigger, which was the technology she used to overpower Hugo and Zeke a while ago. Of course, Lulu was eavesdropping on the conversation and ultimately agrees to join the group. Keith takes a look at the Excel trigger, and like I said before, it's a weaker version of Blood Rage. You do certain things during combat and it'll temporarily boost your power as a result. Turns out Lulu's was pretty unstable, so Keith fixes hers and he gives everyone else stable ones. Not long after that, the crew barely misses an Ash Aragami. Hilda and Hugo remind the player of how dangerous they are and how they can one-shot you and how no one's ever been able to beat one, and you know how it is when they introduce a new class of Aragami. Then Hilda's all like, well, hopefully we'll never run into one.
A few moments later.
What happened?
This response. It's an Ash Aragami.
Of course it is. The group heads into the back to check on Claire, and the protagonist notices a little girl in the storage room. He, or she, saves the girl from getting eaten, and the rest of the team manages to shake the Ash Aragami so the crawler can get away. Despite what Hugo said about Ash Aragami being able to scratch and kill you, the protagonist turns out okay. Turns out the little girl was the cargo, and she came in clutch with the healing. The group takes them to the medical area, and the protagonist regains consciousness 3 days later. By now, everyone has come to the conclusion that the girl most likely isn't human. Hilda asks Claire for an explanation, but Claire didn't know much about what was in the container, just that it had, and I quote, the hope of humanity inside of it. Claire insists that they continue the journey, but Zeke objects, worried that the hope of humanity might translate to conducting inhumane experiments on the girl. And he does have a point. You've already seen how dirty they do the ages. Hilda proposes that they continue their journey to Gleipnir, but the girl will be treated like a regular person and then they'll document what happened as a shipping accident. Everyone agrees to this and they decide to name the little girl Feem. She also grows quite attached to the protagonist. She calls you daddy if your character is male and mommy if they're female, and from that point forward she also follows you non-stop around the base. So congratulations, you got clapped by an Aragami and now you're a parent. Make of that what you will. So, about those deadly ash Aragami that you keep having close calls with, yeah, your luck's about to run out now.
What? Again? But we just ran into one like 5 seconds ago!
Your group gets ambushed by one after a mission, but Feem steps in and cures the entire team. The protagonist triggers engage with her and they manage to defeat it. Yes, the same type of Aragami that everyone was saying couldn't be stopped not too long ago. The crawler decides to make a pit stop at Port Chrysanthemum, and Hilda reminds the protagonist that even though the Pennywort port is gone, the contract still remains in effect, and the governor of Pennywort actually requested that their ages be returned. Hilda's port itself is pretty nice. She's even got a few orphans and young ages under her wing, and it further motivates Hugo to open up his own port. First things first though, the Pennywort ages still belong to Pennywort, and Hugo has an idea to work around this. He asks Hilda if she could buy them out from Pennywort. Of course, the price would be outrageous, but Hugo suggested they use the information that they've gathered so far to cover the price. Keith hands her all the data on the Ash Aragami, which is a pretty substantial amount because remember, we're the only ones as of now that have killed one. Lulu chips in with Baron's data on the acceleration trigger too, technology that Keith managed to perfect, mind you. To top it all off, there's the fee that Hilda was going to pay the ages for their work. Still not enough, but Hugo and the others were dead serious on pitching this to Pennywort and seeing what happens. He also takes note of the fact that Feem is the one attracting the Ash Aragami to the crawler, and they're the only people on the planet that can successfully kill them, so they'll still be needed anyway. After a little more haggling, Hilda finally agrees to let them stay, and the children who were in the Pennywort prison with them will be placed in her orphanage. Feem also gets a god arc so she can help us out on missions, because she's an Aragami, so she doesn't really have to worry about compatibility and all that. She can just pick one up and go. One day, the group finishes a mission and the protagonist and Feem are the last ones to pull out. A few Aragami get the drop on them, but they're saved by a pretty suspicious looking guy. He offers the two of us a ride, saying that he's taking it upon himself to help out young ages, but thankfully we were awake during Stranger Danger class. Hilda gives us a call to check up on us, and at the mention of her name, the guy disappears. That scene wasn't as random as it seems. We'll see him again. It's around this time that everyone is starting to remember that once they get to Gleipnir, they'll have to hand Feem over. Everyone is pondering over whether or not they really should, and Feem deciding to throw a party for us to celebrate our accomplishments thus far only worsens the dilemma. Turns out the decision gets made for us. Inukai, the head scientist at Gleipnir and the guy who was supposed to receive our delivery, boards the ash crawler ahead of time and captures Feem early. And yes, Inukai is one of those ages are scum, even though you're doing most of the grunt work, you're still beneath me, blah blah blah, you know the type by now. Of course we're not just gonna let him waltz out of our own base with Feem in tow. We ask him just what he plans to do with her, and let's just say his response kinda confirms Zeke's fears.
A wild beast shouldn't go without a muzzle. Above all, this thing is an Aragami, remember?
We decide to let them pass, but no need to worry, you already know there's a rescue mission cooking up in here. So basically the plan is to follow Inukai's vessel to where they're taking Feem, and the ages will complete the tail end of the journey on foot to avoid detection, because, well, I guess no one would expect a person to just be running around the Ashlands like that.
Hike across the Ashlands?
At this point everyone's calling Hugo crazy for coming up with this, but he reminds everyone that Inukai currently has Feem, who's basically a magnet for the Ash Aragami. Their crew is going to see a giant Ashborne coming for them and will conveniently show up and act like we're doing them a favor. Then we'll make off with Feem in the middle of all that chaos. At this point you're probably wondering, how are they so certain that an Ash Aragami will be close enough to sense Feem's presence? And that's where Hugo comes in. He volunteers to be the bait, and the first time I heard that I thought he was screwed, 100%. I told you already, he fills the same shoes that Lindo and Julius did in 1 and 2, so he was already treading on thin eyes. I was like, this is it. They'll pull it off, but that Aragami's gonna eat him for sure. Thankfully, things go quite well. We're treated to one of the best looking cutscenes in the entire franchise. Hugo approaches Inukai's crawler, bringing the Ash Aragami right to them and alerting their crew of the impending danger. He uses a smoke bomb to blind the Aragami for a second, and since it can't see, it falls back on its remaining senses to zero in on Feem. It manages to detach Feem's container, and while it's busy trying to open it, Hugo manages to trap both of them underground. You, Zeke, and Lulu head in there to open the container and get Feem. The Ashborne does try and stop you on the way out, but Claire shows up and the four of you manage to chase it off. Turns out Hugo survived.
How about that? We're all heroes who rescued a transport from the fearsome Ash Aragami.
Yeah, congratulations, Hugo, you broke the cycle. We don't really get an opportunity to celebrate, however. Inukai's pressing charges on Port Chrysanthemum for mishandling cargo, and apparently that stunt we just pulled really has him fuming because he demands that all ages involved be sentenced to death by firing squad. Yep. It's like the more good these guys do, the more shit they get for it. Claire does try to stick up for us, but the soldier, we'll call him Mouthpiece, wouldn't budge. Literally a couple of minutes after hearing this, however, everyone's informed of another Ash Aragami closing in on the facility. So of course Mouthpiece, who was talking all that good shit not too long ago, does a complete 180 and starts begging us to go out there and fight. Claire, taking advantage of the situation, requests that they reconsider their decision if we manage to kill it. Mouthpiece doesn't really believe that we can kill it, but before he can give an answer, a very important looking old man phones in. His name is Abraham Gadolin, and he's the commander-in-chief of Gleipnir. He was also a former god-eater, as evidenced by the sealed armlet he's wearing. Anyway, Gadolin acts in a somewhat nicer manner than Mouthpiece if the Hounds could please stop the Ash Aragami from eating the entire base alive. They agree, under the condition that they'll be properly compensated afterwards. We manage to beat it, and the Governor General showers us with compliments. Hey man, none of that sappy stuff's necessary, just hand over Feem and keep it moving. We're not really used to getting praised around here. The Governor General informs us of a conference that's going to be held shortly. Representatives from all of the ports will gather together for a large-scale operation to reclaim Fenrir HQ. Apparently there's a wealth of knowledge buried in there, but no one could get near it because it was crawling with Ashborne. However, we have killed a few of them by now, so we could be a huge help on the expedition. The Governor General personally invites us and we agree to participate. Oh, and I wasn't joking about the whole Feem thing, we do get to keep her. Inukai isn't very happy about this, and while the Governor General does acknowledge that Feem will be safer with us, he tells Inukai that they did sample her cells and he's free to play around with those. Hilda introduces us to a guy named EIN. He's a god-eater who runs Port Dusty Miller. Yeah, completely new character, definitely not someone you've seen before. EIN looks over all the data we've collected on Ashborne so far and offers us $2 billion, euros. I'm not really sure what the canon currency is in the God Eater universe. 3 does take place in Europe, so I'm going to assume it's euros, but regardless, I think we can all agree 2 billion of anything is a pretty hefty sum for our efforts.
How many candies can that buy?
After signing off on the deal, Hugo decides to invest the money, to Feem's great disappointment. The assembly takes place not too long after, and the Governor General basically fills everyone in on what's going on. If they can reclaim Fenrir HQ, there's plenty of resources in there that could give them the boost they need to stand up to the Ash Aragami. One of these things is Odin, a super weapon that's still in one of Fenrir's factories. The Governor General believes that if they can dig this thing up and find a power source strong enough to revive it, it'll have enough firepower to dust off the Ashlands guaranteed or your money back, because these types of plans totally worked in the last 2 games. Remember the Aegis project from 1? The Godark soldiers in 2? Yeah, it's not like those blew up in everyone's faces or anything. Anyway, all the ports agree to set out on the expedition and they disband the meeting after that. Not too long after, Chrysanthemum gets a mission from Inukai. He wants the Hounds to investigate the Crimson Queen. Now you might be wondering, who the heck are they? The Crimson Queen are a group of rebel ages who seek to free their own kind from Gleipnir. As for the mission itself, apparently there's a mole within Gleipnir who's working with the Crimson Queen, and he or she was spotted nearby. However, when the Hounds go out to investigate, an ash storm suddenly forms near them and they're forced to retreat. Hilda finds it very strange that an ash storm just popped up out of nowhere. However, before she can dwell on this any further, Inukai phones in and accuses us of being the traitors. He says an ash storm forming right near us and the target we were looking for just up and disappearing would be more than enough to connect us with the Crimson Queen. So basically, he plans to use the situation to try and get us in trouble. He admits that he was never fond of Chrysanthemum spearheading the Fenrir Reclamation Initiative because he didn't like how Hilda, and I quote, ignored age handling rules. Which is true. Unlike Pennywort, she didn't bother handcuffing us when we were out of combat, and Hugo said it himself. He trusted Hilda because she saw them as equals. But no, apparently if you care for the ages under your command and actually treat them like people, apparently you're the asshole. Inukai then drops the bombshell. He's trying to get us into deep shit because Hilda knows something about the Crimson Queen. More specifically, she was friends with their leader, Werner. Inukai then kinda touts how much of a shitty person she is because she knew this guy all along and didn't tell anyone else on the crawler and whatnot, and she's not to be trusted because she has secrets. The man has a shack made of the world's thinnest glass, but he's got a Congo cannon aimed at his neighbor down the street. Hilda confirms that it is true, and now that Inukai's gotten his little one-up, he demands that we hand over Feem or he'll send an ash storm our way. And yes, if you haven't realized it yet, Inukai has found a way to control ash storms. However, Hilda points out that only the Crimson Queen has technology capable of generating ash storms, which would mean that Inukai must have gotten in contact with them if he's sitting here bragging about how he can set them off. So now that everyone knows Inukai is the traitor, Hilda wants to know what he really wants Feem for. Inukai stated that he simply wanted to sell her to them. By now, a large horde of Aragami have surrounded the base, meaning we can't move off, and he wants Feem by tomorrow morning. The next day arrives, and Inukai gets arrested. How about that? It was a setup from the start. They were just baiting him into admitting that he did business with the Crimson Queen and was trying to get rid of Chrysanthemum. It seemed like the Governor General was also on the crawler when all that was going down, so he heard everything Inukai said with his own ears. Once the Governor General leaves, Hilda tells the Hounds all they need to know about Werner. The two of them were classmates in the same lab, and he's also the Governor General's son, which is why Hilda knows the Governor General so well. Everything was good until the calamity hit. This was basically the disaster that caused the Ashlands in the first place. Gleipnir managed to get things back under control, and this is what gave rise to a new set of God Eaters with limited rights. Werner wasn't on board with what Gleipnir was doing, so he broke off and formed the Crimson Queen to give all ages a chance to live freely. That red-headed guy that you and Feem ran into before, that was Werner. Anyway, the Fenrir Reclamation Initiative officially starts, and the Governor General gives everyone the details on the mission. Our group gets paired up with Baron, who's also noticed by now that a certain age they tried to get rid of is still alive. Chrysanthemum is trying to figure out how to navigate the depths, and Lulu brings up the fact that the area is being jammed by the Crimson Queen. However, she also knows that Baron has connections with them, so they're probably managing to navigate the area without much of an issue. One of Baron's ages, a man named Go, who also happened to be Lulu's master, boards Chrysanthemum's crawler with a message from Baron's general. He asks Lulu to hand over Feem or Baron will set an ash storm on Chrysanthemum's vessel. Lulu rebukes him for this and reveals to the audience how ash storms, at least the artificial ones, are created. Basically, Baron put special chips in each of their ages' armlets, and I guess an ash storm generates if they set it off. This was the technology that they were passing around with the Crimson Queen, and I guess that also means that that's what Inukai was gonna do to us had the Governor General not been listening in. Speaking of listening in, your character heard the entire conversation, but Lulu tells you that she can handle it on her own. We venture deeper into the depths, and Lulu runs off during one of our missions, despite Hilda telling her to stay away from Baron for her own safety. She meets up with Baron's general and Go, and the former is very disappointed to see that she didn't bring Feem along. Lulu intends to negotiate, but Go refuses and opts to treat the audience to a nice little fight scene instead. I just want to reiterate how amazing these fight scenes look. Why can't the gameplay be this cool? Anyway, they go at it for a few minutes and the Baron General is getting impatient. He tells Go to hurry up and kill Lulu already, but Go basically tells the General to mind his own business. Maybe you shouldn't have called his student a cockroach, Mr. General.
That crawling little cockroach.
General Baron, probably incensed that an age of all people just told him to piss off, launches what appears to be a missile, and Go blocked it like a boss. You know this is a man who just guards. By now the rest of us have caught up with Lulu. Obviously General Baron setting up an ash storm generator and making deals with terrorists are a big no-no, so we plan to bring him in. Go takes his leave and it's unknown what happens to him after that. Nobody's really mad that Lulu ran off on her own to face Baron, but we do remind her that the Hounds are a package deal. We stick together around here. Baron has no captain anymore, so they can't continue on the expedition with us. We also managed to receive their info on the depths. The Hounds continue their journey, and they arrive at one area in particular with a very high ash density. Not too long after that, they're approached by a large group of ages. Turns out they walked right into the Crimson Queen's territory. This is where Neil, Zeke's long-lost brother, makes his first appearance. But before Zeke can say anything about it, Werner shows up and formally introduces himself. To everyone's surprise, he's not here to fight. Werner explains that this area is a safe haven for ages. They can live out their normal lives without any interference from the outside world. Ricardo asks about the Crimson Queen members who are using themselves to intentionally set off ash storms, and Werner states that he tried to deter them from doing that, though he does admit that he understands why they would try something like that. that, which tells me he probably didn't try too hard to stop them, if you want my 2 cents. Zeke then asks a very important question. How are they able to live out in ash that thick? Normal God Eaters need to take a C variant of their current bias factor to temporarily last out in the ash, and while ages can naturally survive in the ash without much of an issue, like I said earlier, they're still not immune. They can't live in it 24/7. Well, it turns out that when the Governor General gave Inukai Feem cells, Inukai went, and I'm assuming he sold it to the Crimson Queen, because I doubt they got that shit for free. When the Crimson Queen fused these cells with their own bias factors, it made them basically immune to the ash, so that's why they're trying to set up this utopia out here so they can live in peace. And I guess because the ash density is so high, people aren't just gonna waltz in and cause trouble. Except, spoiler alert, they kinda do later on, but we'll get there in a minute. Werner asks the Hounds to join him, but we refuse. To my surprise, he didn't stop us, and he even showed us the way to Fenrir HQ. He also warned us of a giant Aragami in the vicinity. And of course, we run into the thing like 12 seconds later. It's implied to be the same Anubis that tried to raid the cargo some time ago. Fortunately, taking out Ash Aragami isn't too much of a big deal for us at this point. We clean him up and make it to Fenrir. Yay, mission successful! Most of the stuff underneath the base was intact, just as the Governor General had predicted, so Gleipnir's gonna be all over that. As for us, we won our freedom, we collected the reward, we partied all night.
Is everyone happy?
Well, Feem, this is a God Eater game. When something really good happens, it means everything's about to go to shit in a little bit. So everyone goes their separate ways, but 1 month later they all come back together at Hilda's port for a meal. Everything's fine and dandy until the next day when Hilda and Amy show everyone a message from the Governor General. The good news is that the Odin Project they were working on is almost finished. The bad news? Odin still needs a power source, so the Governor General is asking all ages to literally give up their lives as fuel for it.
Is he telling us all to die?
Yes, Hugo, that's exactly what he's saying. A happy ending? Get out of here. They just saw us run through the depths beating down Ash Aragami like it was another Tuesday. Even worse, you're the captain and you survived the mission. We can't have that. So yes, the ages need to go out and die, and the Governor General even tries to kinda sell it to them by saying, "Oh, don't worry, you'll be seen as heroes. We'll hold y'all in high regard after this is all over." Yeah, cause y'all totally did a good job of that when they were still alive and working for you. You can't tell me these people wouldn't party the same day Odin is activated and the plan is executed. Oh, how convenient, we deleted the Ashlands and those rotten ages all in one fell swoop. This calls for a celebration. Oh, and if you couldn't already tell, they don't have any choice in any of this either. Gleipnir has a list of every single age and potential age in the region, about 1,000, and if someone refuses to join, they'll be branded as an enemy of humankind. In fact, they've barely finished watching the video when Amy gets word that Gleipnir's already surrounded the crawler, and they're waiting for Port Chrysanthemum's response, which would be...
outright refusal.
Of course it is. We gather up all the ages, children included, on the crawler and make a break for it. We're gonna have to stick with routes that aren't being monitored by Gleipnir if we want to move around. Claire also warns us about an age eater along our path. An Ash Aragami whose favorite food happens to be ages. A God Eater for all intents and purposes. Of course, the other ports aren't taking too kindly to the Governor General's message either. Lots of ages are revolting and joining the Crimson Queen, and this has resulted in a lot more Ash Storm suicide bombers as well, so Gleipnir and the Crimson Queen are millimeters away from being at war with each other right now. This also marks the start of Zeke's rather short character arc. He kinda starts wondering, well, what exactly is an age? He notes that they're forced to take the compatibility test, in most cases when they're still little children, then their port makes them go out and bust their asses for the sake of humanity. Then when they finally get the job done, they're told to just hand over their lives, in a pretty dehumanizing matter, I might add. Cause it's not like they're all gonna personally stop the Ash, they're just gonna be batteries for Odin. Sucked dry until there's nothing left. And apparently if they're not on board with dying for some of the same people who were treating them like shit to begin with, they're just selfish monsters, traitors to the human race. Frankly, it's a pretty damn good question, Zeke. I'm with you on that one. Anyway, Zeke is pretty down in the dumps. I think he, and admittedly myself as well, were under the impression that, well, they don't like us now, but if we work hard and save the world and prove to everyone that we aren't just mindless animals, then maybe they'll give us a break. But that's not true, it never was, and the Governor General's announcement really made that obvious to the entire crew. Zeke says he doesn't know what he should do anymore, but then Feem suggests he just follow his heart. We're still on the run from Gleipnir, and during one mission we detect an Ashborne in combat with some unidentified God Eaters. We get a little closer and we find the Age Eater himself, Dromi. Neil and 2 Crimson Queen Ages are also in the corner arguing with a Gleipnir God Eater. The God Eater squared approaches them, and Neil and the Ages are about to make a break for it and leave the Gleipnir soldier to fend for himself. Zeke grabs the Dromi's attention and tries to distract it for for a bit. Neil is confused as to why Zeke would help someone who doesn't like ages, but Zeke points out that nobody deserves to be left to die. Your character saves Zeke and gets a good hit in too. Hugo does reprimand Zeke for jumping in like that.
That was completely reckless!
Hugo, with all due respect, I jumped in the thing's mouth and held it open with my legs while I fired point-blank shots down its throat, and I don't recall getting a tongue lashing from you after the mission. Anyway, now that everyone's regrouped, it's time to take on Dromi, one of the most hated Aragami in the game. If you haven't mastered the art of just guarding yet, God help you. After we avenge Littlefoot's mom, we meet up with Port Dusty Miller. Hilda wants to be put in direct contact with the Crimson Queen so she can talk with Werner, and she figures EIN, who's totally not Soma, can help her do that. She hopes that if the Crimson Queen is willing to give Gleipnir the ash-resistant technology that they bought from Inukai, then Gleipnir might reconsider killing off all the ages. Before anyone can do anything, however, Werner appears on the screen with a message for all of Europe. He's dropping the whole pacifism idea and urges all ages to rally under him and pave the way for a new future, even if they have to take it by force. So basically he added a gallon of gasoline to an already raging fire. It's apparent that the ports will be pressured into picking one side or the other. Neil in particular was almost certain that Baron would join up with the Crimson Queen since they were good business partners before, and their top-of-the-line tech would give the Crimson Queen the edge they needed. Hilda hasn't given up on talking though, and she says she still wants to try and meet with Werner. Werner accepts her invitation and they have their little chat. Put simply, he isn't gonna budge, but he does tell her that Gleipnir might back out if Chrysanthemum does something for them. Guess what they gotta do? Just take a wild guess. If your answer was hand over Feem, you're absolutely correct. Right now, Gleipnir is digging up every corner of the Ashlands in search of Feem, because her Aragami cells would be perfect to power Odin. The bias factor that the ages use are close enough, hence the Governor General's announcement for all ages to give up their lives, but Werner explains that if Feem took their place, she could replace thousands of them, though her life would still get consumed in the process. Feem doesn't really understand what's going on and asks for an explanation, not even aware of the fact that she herself is an Aragami. We choose not to fill her in and she notices that everyone suddenly looks dejected, which only further rouses her suspicion. Werner then collects Neil and leaves the crawler. Feem asks you what is war and why do people want to fight. She says she can't understand herself why people who are already feeling sad would try and spread the agony further. She says she really wants to make everyone happy, but she's not sure how. She's too pure for us. We didn't deserve a character like this. Apparently, Baron isn't working with the Crimson Queen after all. Gleipnir had Baron in cahoots with the Crimson Queen to earn their trust, but when the time came, Baron leaked all of the Crimson Queen's information to Gleipnir. So now the Crimson Queen is like, well, screw it. Set off more ash storms, that's all we can do at this point. Sometime later, everyone's told to meet in the lobby for an announcement from Gleipnir. Claire tells Feem to stay behind, but Feem decides to check the terminal while they're gone. Apparently, the Crimson Queen is no longer a threat. Gleipnir steamrolled them. Any Crimson Queen survivors are being arrested and taken to Fenrir HQ to fuel Odin. Neil has been confirmed to be in the latter group. Werner's whereabouts are unknown, but it's assumed that he hasn't been captured yet, or they would have mentioned it in the news report. Meanwhile, Feem's all done studying up on humanoid Aragami. She also discovers that she can be used as a substitute for pretty much all of the ages that Gleipnir was planning to capture. Back at the Crimson Queen's hideout, a group of Gleipnir soldiers finally find Werner. They manage to restrain him, but when Werner overhears another soldier's rather gruesome plans for the ages that they've already captured, he finds his second wind. He turns on his Excel trigger and kills most of the soldiers that were restraining him. There's only a few left and another soldier warns them over the radio that Werner's actually set himself up to detonate and touching him again would cause an ash storm. Soldier 1 tells everyone to retreat, but Soldier 2 shoots him anyway, triggering the ash storm. Now, while you're told that ages from Baron and apparently the Crimson Queen as well have devices in their armlets that can cause them to set off ash storms, this is the first time you actually get to see one firsthand. Word gets back to the Governor General that Werner started an ash storm and, well, he's dead. And remember, the Governor General is his father, so I'm assuming he's not feeling too good about that. Before I continue, I just want to say I do feel like Werner's death was kind of a waste. Gleipnir was mostly run by humans and God-eaters, and while they were supposed to represent humanity's future, they did have policies and standards that were morally reprehensible. The Crimson Queen, on the other hand, was run by ages. They were understandably fed up with the way the rest of the world was treating them, and while their methods also became pretty extreme, I say became because it was assumed that only a vocal minority were Ash Storm suicide bombers, and most of them were minding their own business until this whole Odin announcement. But their actions were simply the result of them being backed up into a wall. Baron seemed like the Crimson Queen's last hope, and when they betrayed them, the only thing the Crimson Queen had left at that point was their lives, and now even that was about to be taken. So they were left to retaliate in the only way they could, by setting off more ash storms. It might not have been the right thing to do, but I don't think anyone can deny that it was a very human thing to do. My point is, Werner really represented that other extreme. Gleipnir and the Crimson Queen ended up doing the same shit, they were just standing on opposite sides of the conflict. I feel like 1 and 2 were complex but simple. Yeah, the games devoted a lot of time to explaining complicated topics like how certain characters were able to do certain things, how God Eaters got their powers, how the God Arcs work, etc. But the conflict was simple. For the most part, it was humans, good. Aragami, bad. Humans work together to kill big scary monsters and save the world. I feel like 3 was simple, but complex. The story seems very basic, you know, oh, you're a slave, and you want to be free, and you have an opportunity to prove to everyone that you can be taken seriously. Wow, it must be your lucky day. Oh, little Aragami girl wants to be your daughter, oh, it's so cute, but it definitely has its underlying messages as well, things that aren't as in your face unless you really think about it. I like how neither Gleipnir nor the Crimson Queen fall into the category of outright good or outright bad. Sometimes they do good things and sometimes they do horrible things, and Zeke even picks up on this. There comes a point where it's just about doing what's right, no matter who you are or what side you lean towards. And I find it kind of funny that most of the people in this game spend more time fighting each other than they do the Aragami, the monsters that put them in this situation to begin with. Anyway, getting back on topic, Werner set off his ash storm and several other Crimson Queen survivors have followed suit. However, it seems the other ash storms are being drawn towards the same area where Werner was. They're coming together to form an ash tempest, which is basically an ash storm, but worse. This thing's capable of swallowing up the whole world if left unattended. The Governor General, realizing that they're out of time, tells his soldiers to load up Odin with what they already have, which is about 500 ages. Some of the soldiers explain that Odin hasn't been fully tested yet, and they only have half the ages needed to carry out the operation successfully, but their orders remain the same. Fire up Odin and take the chance. Yeah, because that's totally not going to backfire or anything. Meanwhile, at Chrysanthemum, everyone's noticed that Feem's gone missing. They find out that she logged into a terminal when no one was looking and studied up on what was going on, so now everyone knows she's headed to Fenrir HQ to exchange her life for everyone else's. Feem makes it to Fenrir shortly afterwards. She's already messaged the Governor General in advance and told him that she'd like to take the place of all the ages they've collected, well aware of the fact that she'd be consumed in the process. The Governor General tries to console her by saying that her sacrifice will save countless lives and prevent a war. I call bullshit, because you know damn well they're gonna find something else to fight over soon enough. The Hounds make it to HQ not too long after. Gleipnir already deployed Odin, but before the Hounds leave, the Governor General gives everyone a farewell letter from Feem. At this point, Feem's already in the Ava and ready to move out. She fires up Odin and sets out with a very familiar sounding track playing in the background. The Hounds are close behind and they catch up to her soon enough. You also get to find out what her letter said, and of course she had some really good things to say about the whole crew. Feem starts to erase the Ashlands, and for a second it looks like she pulled it off without too much trouble. Unfortunately, that was just the first wave, and Feem's spent, so the Governor General gives the order for the backup Odins, that all have ages in them mind you, to take the field. It makes me wonder though, from the way everyone was going on, you'd think Feem would have been able to take out just about all of it, but she couldn't. They said she could replace thousands of ages. Did they not know that there was going to be a second wave of ash? Because this is telling me that if they didn't have Feem, they'd be in some serious trouble. They'd have used up most of their ages on wave 1, and even though the first wave was the worst, it makes me wonder if they would have had enough for the second. Anyway, Feem tries to endure another round, but her Odin goes berserk, surprising no one. The Protagonist also speaks up, surprising everyone.
Hold it! It makes no difference if there is a way! Feem's waiting for us! We are not going to give up. We are in this until the very last. Here we go, team. We are saving Feem. Then, we're all going home, and we're throwing a huge party. Together, as a family.
Yeah!
And one cinematic final boss fight later, Odin finally goes down. Feem then comes out and vacuums off the Ashlands, causing ash density to drop across the globe. Good job, Feem. The credits roll and we get a little narration from EIN, who's totally not Soma. Basically, everything's okay now. Don't get it twisted, the Ashlands are still a threat, but like I said, density levels have dropped and everything's cool now. He mentions that conditions for ages have improved, people are getting along better now, and they even terminated the Odin Project. We then see EIN with a very familiar looking god arc in hand.
Wait, what?
An evil one Buster Blade with a rejector tower shield and no gun? That's the same god arc that Soma had back in 1 and 2. Nah, I'm sure it's just a coincidence. They can't be the same person, can they? And that's the end of the main story. Oh, Jesus Christ. I just realized I have another devil and traversing the past to talk about. This video is going to be like 30 years long. Anyway, here we go. The next set of missions are called Another Devil. Basically, we're now doing business with Dusty Miller. Keith and EIN are researching something called adaptive armor, something that you can just slap onto your crawler and it'll automatically adjust itself to different ash densities, so this will allow people to go deeper into the Ashlands, leading to longer voyages and safer routes. You're probably thinking, okay, this sounds great and all, so what's the catch? Well, they're gonna need the core of an Ashborne Aragami, Ashborne Anubis to be specific. True to its name, it does emit a bias field similar to that of an Ashborne. In other words, it's super strong and we're gonna need the best of the best to take it down. EIN asks the protagonist to come along, of course, because nothing moves without you around. Feem is basically immune to ash, so she's a no-brainer. EIN himself will also be taking part. Interesting, I didn't know an old type God Eater could have such high ash resistance, and the only old type who had a different bias factor back in the day was... Nah, there's no way they're the same person. That'd be crazy, right? Anyway, the fourth person who'll be joining us is Neil. He's been hanging out with EIN ever since the Crimson Queen collapsed. Remember, because he was in the Crimson Queen, his bias factor got mixed in with some of Feem's cells, so he's pretty ash resistant too. And according to EIN, he was one of the Crimson Queen's best. Might explain why the Crimson Queen went down so easily, but you didn't hear that from me. Our mission is simple. Discover the thing's whereabouts and then kill it. At this point, you unlock EIN as a party member, and what do you know? The ages all have burst arts, but EIN knows a blood art. The same blood art that Soma learned in God Eater 2, provided you did his character episodes. But that doesn't mean anything, right? Right? Anyway, things get bad pretty fast. First of all, Neil can't use engage, so that kind of puts us at a disadvantage during fights. Secondly, well, let's just say the Ashborne Anubis found us before we could find him. He ambushes us during a mission one day and puts Hugo in the infirmary. Careful Hugo, the curse of the long-bladed captain looms over you. Things go pretty smoothly after that though. We eventually manage to cure Hugo. Neil feels really discouraged after what happens and refuses to fight because he doesn't want to lose us the way he lost his friends back at the Crimson Queen, but you eventually do convince him to help out again. You, Feem, EIN, and Neil head out to kill the Ashborne Aragami, again, as we planned. Keith also made an anti-Ashstorm bomb for us and it'll nullify the Ashborne Anubis' bias field so we can actually fight it properly. We kill it, collect the core, and go home. Mission accomplished. Hugo asks why EIN is working with us when he could be doing business with someone else. He says while the adaptive armor will improve Ashland navigation, he himself hopes to use it to visit his friends back in the Far East. Hey EIN, you know who else used to work in the Far East? Soma. I wonder if you guys are... So the next episode, or rather episodes, are called Traversing the Past. Basically, Keith discovers that you can hop into everyone's heads and unlock a feature called Core Engage. It basically gives everyone upgraded engage skills and a complimentary level 3 burst. You have to do one for every God Eater on board, and it's basically you just going through painful moments that they endured before you met them, and then each episode ends with you fighting their insecurities in the form of a memory Aragami. Most of them are about what you'd expect. Hugo being a fearless leader on the outside but scared for his life on the inside, Zeke wondering if he was a good enough older brother to Neil and Keith, Ricardo learning to be a bit more confident in himself, Keith learning that you don't have to be a good fighter to be useful, etc. EIN had the best one hands down, and I'll go into his in greater detail in a little bit, but besides his, I also really liked Ricardo's. He spent a lot of time with Hilda and Werner before the Ashlands hit, so you got to learn more about them through him. The one about Claire and the drama that was going on in her family was really fun to learn about. Then again, you didn't really know a lot about Claire's past to begin with, so anything on her was welcome. Feem's was also pretty interesting. Because she wasn't human, you couldn't literally go into her head, so instead you're just helping her write up a school report on the importance of family, you know, just some wholesome bonding with your Aragami daughter. Everyone else's was kinda just whatever. Like, it wasn't bad by any means, but it's not like it's anything you couldn't have guessed. I also felt that fighting the little cognitive blast spiders was a bit unnecessary. They could have just had you listen to the memory nodes and call it a day. On top of that, to progress each person's episode, you had to grind out their resonance rate by taking them out on regular missions. So, excluding EIN's episode, which we'll get into shortly, everyone else's could have been condensed to like an hour tops, but it ends up taking like twice that amount of time because of the grinding that you have to do. Anyway, let's talk about EIN's episode though, because that's the highlight of this whole thing. You can't even do his until you've finished everyone else's, and while you're doing the other ones, there's a build up to EIN's as well. You know, secrets are coming out. Bombshell number 1, EIN's illness. I mentioned before that even though he was a regular God Eater, he had a really strong bias factor, so it allowed him to go out into the ash without needing the attunement that the others would. Well, it turns out that the bias factor in him isn't just some oracle cells mixed in with his own, as is the case with a lot of other people. There's a literal pocket-sized Aragami inside of him, and Feem senses it and tells him that if they don't do something soon, that Aragami's gonna eat him from the inside out. Bombshell number 2, the Ashlands. There are these guys called the 3 Sages of the Calamity, 3 scientists who were responsible for the Ashlands due to an experiment gone wrong. Their names were Ghosta Heidenstam, Josiah Quan, and Soma Shiksal. Now, of course, when the accident happened, the 3 of them went into hiding because, well, they'd be criminals now. Bombshell number 3, Soma's whereabouts. EIN meets with the Baron General privately. Somehow he managed to weasel his way out of trouble after the whole, Crimson Queen incident. General Baron is trying to strike a deal with him since he feels like EIN will be able to complete the adaptive armor much faster with Baron's backing. This isn't the first time that Mr. Baron's been bothering EIN with business deals, and EIN refuses for the umpteenth time. The Baron General, now irritated, then holds up a picture of Soma, telling EIN that he knows that they're the same person and he'll snitch to Port Chrysanthemum if EIN doesn't work with him on the adaptive armor. Such a bold accusation, Mr. Baron. Can't you see that they have different names? Never mind the fact that they look alike, have the same voice actor, wield the same god arc, and have the same in-game moveset. EIN can't be Soma if he's named EIN. Can he? Alright, I really do think I've stretched that joke to exhaustion. Yes, if you couldn't already tell just by looking at him, EIN and Soma are indeed the same person. He just changed his name after the calamity hit and the Ashlands were formed. Soma says he doesn't care if the general spills the beans and then leaves. Mr. Baron wasn't kidding. He leaks the information like he said he would, and Keith, Hugo, and your character are the first ones to find out. While they believe that Soma and EIN being the same person is within the realm of possibility, they still keep the information to themselves for the minute just in case Baron was trying to spread mistrust amongst the crew. Soma collapses one day and Amy finds his unconscious body and takes him to the infirmary. It's at this point that we tell the rest of them that EIN is Soma, and everyone also finds out about the Aragami inside of him. Unlike the rest of the crew, Soma's character episode doesn't really have any filler. You spend the first few missions gathering items to cure him, and then you spend the rest of it diving into his head like you did everyone else. As you journey through Soma's psyche, you meet his inner Aragami, who's manifested himself as a younger version of Soma. You argue with him from time to time over whether or not he should eat the man alive to, and I quote, save him. You also get a lot more details on this whole calamity incident. Soma was indeed working with 2 other scientists, and they were trying to make these microorganisms that would only devour Aragami. I guess like some kind of anti-Aragami spray or something. They just let this thing loose outside and it does the god eating for them. It sounds like it could have very well meant the extinction of the Aragami if everything had worked out. Anyway, Heidenstam and Quan were working on the project and they found out Soma, while quite young at the time, was a pretty gifted scientist, so they invited him on board. Everything was going well, they were making strides, and soon it'd be time to put the project into action. However, Soma studied what they had on the nanomachines so far, and told them that while it should work as intended, there's still a chance that they can go berserk and cause a global catastrophe. He insists that they postpone the testing until they can get that sorted out. It might take a few years since they have to redo core components, but his argument was, better safe than sorry. Heidenstam and Quan see where he's coming from, but they're all like, well, that might be true, but what if that doesn't happen?
So you're suggesting we delay the project for an unknown possibility? That's ridiculous.
They try to convince Soma to not put the project on hold. They say things like, well, there's a lot of funding that went to the project and R&D are working their butts off on this. Come on, we can't stop now. Now, obviously, the risk is still astronomically high because if the project fails, they'll lose everything anyway, including their lives. And Soma points that out to them yet again. Quan confirms that if those kinks that Soma just mentioned were to be fixed, then they'd be good to go, and Soma says yes, that'd be correct. So Quan says that he and Heidenstam will work on a proposal and then get back to him later. Except they never do. Their real plan was to run the test behind Soma's back. Soma had no idea what was even going on until he got a call from Fenrir HQ that there's a black cloud approaching the base and everything in the area is disintegrating. By the time Soma gets there, there seems to be no survivors aside from a familiar looking kid who got caught in the rubble. Anubis also shows up just in time to gouge his left eye. He manages to fend it off and he gets a call from Lindo shortly afterwards. Honestly, it felt kinda weird hearing his voice considering there was no mention of any older characters besides Soma up until this point. Anyway, Lindo says he's okay and he says, we're still alive, so I'd say that pretty much confirms that the main characters from the first game are okay. Maybe the minor characters like Kanon, Tatsumi, Gina, Emil, Arena, all of them might be good too. I'm not too sure about the blood unit since they could have been on another mission in another part of the world, but the Far East branch did become their permanent home at the end of God Eater 2, so assuming they were in the den with everyone else, maybe they survived too. I don't know. Soma's residence area is actually deeper than the other characters, so the rest of the group kinda has to help you get there. On your way down, you get to fight some more memory Aragami while jamming to some tunes from the older games. It's quite literally a trip down memory lane. Okay, that one was pretty bad. I'll see myself out now. You finally reach Soma, and both of you convince Aragami Kid Soma that maybe eating him alive isn't the best idea. You take down his inner demons and he wakes from his coma. Soma wakes from his coma. Hey, that rhymes. He gets everyone else up to speed on the details of the calamity, and long story short, after hearing the whole story, we all decide to help him out. First step is getting back to the Far East and meeting up with Soma's old friends. It'll be a big project. Several ports would need to be set up between here and over there. It would also make for a decent supply line between the continents too, so these guys have their work cut out for them. And that's where the story ends. Not gonna lie, I'm pretty excited about what happens next. Now, there are a few things I forgot to talk about before I got into the story, so I'm going to spend the rest of the video discussing them. First of all, the drop rates. I can't believe I forgot to mention them before, but the drop rates for some of the items in this game are horrendous. While it's true that they weren't very high in 1 and 2 either, they at least had characters with skills to counter this. You could increase the drop rate a significant amount, some let you bypass the mission requirements to give you a better shot at getting the item you wanted, so even if you didn't do exactly as you were told, you could still get certain rewards. So for example, there may be an item that you want and it's earned by breaking 5 Aragami bonds during the mission. If you didn't get a chance to do that, then the ignore bond skill would increase the probability of you getting that item anyway. There was also a ticket system with every single Aragami material on the list, both common and rare, so even if you had no luck getting what you wanted from the mission, you could still spend tickets on the materials you needed, and if you were just treading through the story, you probably had quite a few of them saved up anyway since you just get them from finishing missions and breaking a certain amount of bonds, just, playing the game. But most of that doesn't exist in God Eater 3, and the few skills that do increase the drop rate got neutered with almost everything else. And honestly, when you go to craft weapons, especially the ones that are directly based off of Aragami you've been fighting, most of the items you'll need have okay drop rates. Like, you'll look at the weapon you'll want to craft, you'll probably be able to tell who you need to fight just by looking at it, and the drop rates, for the most part, are gonna be, okay. They're gonna be like between 20 and 50%, so you'll probably obtain almost all the parts you need after fighting it 2 or 3 times. But then there's gonna be that one piece you'll need to finish making the weapon. Usually it's like the core or the heart or something really important sounding, and those are gonna be the items that have like a 3% drop rate during missions. Those are gonna be the items that'll have you grinding the same mission over and over and over again. By the time you get one of that last item you needed, you'll have like 50 million of the others in stock. And don't get me wrong, that issue existed in 1 and 2 as well, but like I said, the tickets really helped, because even if there was a rare item that you needed, you could probably just spend a ticket on it. And if you didn't have a ticket, they dropped on every single mission, so you just grind out the mission that had an Aragami that was really easy to kill. Anyway, that's enough about the drop rates. I'm going to nitpick the outfits for a second. They really do leave much to be desired. There were some good ones added in with the free patches, but the vast majority of them are kinda just, ugh. It's all washed out colors with flex tape patches everywhere. The only reason I'm gonna kinda let it slide is because the ugly clothing lines right up with the game's setting. In 1 and 2, like I always keep saying, you did dangerous work but you were compensated quite well for it. Fenrir ran the world back then and you were an elite soldier under them, so it makes sense that your character would be living large outside of combat, or at least as large as you could possibly be living when the world is post-apocalyptic. But in 3 though, the world's gone into even deeper shit and you're basically a slave live in said world, so it does kinda make sense that fashion wouldn't be your top priority. Look, I'm just warning you, that uniform that you get at the beginning of the game is about as good as it gets. Back in 1 and 2, I couldn't wait to change clothes, but in this game I went through half the story in the default outfit because it was just the best they had. Like I said though, most of the patch outfits they added are decent, and just like in the older games, when you beat the story you can unlock other characters' clothes if you want. I think the Switch version has some Tales of Vesperia collaboration outfits, and there's a Code Vein outfit too. The clothing really isn't as big of a deal as I'm making it out to be, I just felt like talking about it for a few minutes. And honestly, they could add more clothes to the game if it ever gets an expansion, because I'm gonna reiterate this, I don't believe for a moment that they actually have zero plans to give the game an expansion or some kind of DLC. Like sure, they said that, but they can say anything. Their priority was making sure that the game sold well, so of course they'd say that they wouldn't have paid content or worse, another version of the game in the works while they're still trying to sell the vanilla version. It doesn't mean that they can't go back on their word a few years later. At the time they were trying to sell a product, so, you know, forgive me if I don't take what they're telling me at face value. All that aside though, if God Eater 3 did get a burst DLC and it was anything like what 1 and 2 got, it would easily become the biggest game in the franchise. They'd add more missions, maybe some new Aragami, throw in some more older ones they might have missed, maybe a brand new gameplay mechanic to keep things fresh. Obviously another story arc would be a no-brainer. The ending of EIN's character episode set the stage perfectly to bring back some of the previous characters, which was something that a lot of fans complained about initially anyway. All that being said, God Eater 3, even as it is now, still makes for a very good addition to the series. It did fall short in some areas, but I think it did more good than bad. They scaled things back just enough to ease in newcomers, but not to the point where it becomes a complete turn-off to series veterans. Overall, thoroughly enjoyed my time with all the God Eater games, and if 3 ever gets any new content after this, I'll gladly cover it. But for now, I'm basically done with the series. I'm considering one more God Eater related video, but as of now it's just an idea. If you see it, you see it, but I won't make any promises. I'm still thinking of what game to cover next on this channel. I've spent a good chunk of my time playing through the God Eater games, and whenever I wasn't playing that, I was playing Kingdom Hearts. Now that I'm done with both of those franchises for the moment, I'm wondering what to cover next. I have started Code Vein. I'm about halfway through. It does seem a little more forgiving than its cousins, but I really do suck at Soulsborne games, so I don't know if I'll finish it. I beat Persona 5 not too long ago, but don't expect anything on that. First of all, it was the vanilla version, which I guess is kind of irrelevant now that Royal is out. Second, I don't have my capture card anymore, so I'd have no way to make a video out of it anyway. Now, Persona 4 Golden just got a PC version, finally, and I've been playing through that. Don't really plan on covering it anytime soon because I want to play it at least 2 or 3 more times. I made a first few hours on Tales of Berseria, but I dropped it shortly after I made that video. I am considering picking it back up one day, I just don't know when. And finally, there's the Trail series. I've heard it's kinda like Kingdom Hearts' better looking cousin, where all the games matter and it's telling one big story, but it's like a really good story and not just something that people constantly meme on. I only have the first Sky game and I don't really see myself getting a hold of the other 2, the Zero Duology or the Cold Steel games anytime soon, but I am seriously considering hopping on the first one and seeing what all the fuss is about. But I've rambled on enough about games that I'm struggling to find time to play. Just know that I am thinking of what to cover next, and I'll try to make sure that y'all don't have to wait too long for it. But for now, that marks the end of the video. If you enjoyed it, feel free to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you want to hear me rattle on about other JRPGs or Japanese games I happen to come across, and I will see you all again very soon.